The story of Meleagar, as we have it in Homer and in later authors, is a rather clear story of anger, revenge, and disaster. It forms a very nice moral tale, and that's the way it first appears in Greek literature, as we will see in the ninth book of Homer's Iliad. There's a much older level of it, which is frustrating me, and as it has frustrated other scholars, in that we see so many alluring hints of what might be the oldest level of the story, the archaeology that we've indulged in occasionally throughout this course to try to find out what's underlying the literary versions we have. We'll talk a little bit about that, but mostly I want to concentrate on this exciting story. It was exciting to the ancient Greeks as it is exciting to us, and see the way it was used as a moral story. As you can see from the very date of this Greek vase, it had made its entry into the world of Greek art very early on. If we think of Homer as writing somewhere, or Homer's works getting into writing around 675 BCE, within less than a century, the story is already appearing in Greek art. Here you see this massive boar with the dogs jumping on it. The boar has already claimed a victim, and Meleagar out in front with his spear. And I'm sharing with you a question that I can't really answer. What we know is that the names of the characters in this story are evocative. The father is Oeneus, the wine man, and the mother is Althea, which comes from a Greek verb, althemai, the healer. A wine man and a healer. There is a story that's recorded in a late source that Oeneus gratified Dionysus, who wanted to have sexual relations with Althea, by essentially not being there, not noticing, and Dionysus, in gratitude, gave Oeneus a vine stem from which, obviously, the grapes that produce wine could be made. So there's clearly a Dionysiac link in this story. How that makes its way into the story of Meleagar is really unclear, although I would suggest that with the confrontation of Oeneus and Artemis, as we'll see, perhaps there is some very, very ancient evocation of the power of Dionysus. How that would in fact relate to a goddess of hunting is something that I can't explain, and I've never seen any particularly convincing one. I just want to let you know that there's something going on here that is beneath the story as we know it. You have the basic accounts in your mythology textbook, and I hope you've read them or will read them. And then there's a lot of visual evidence, one example of which you've already seen. I'm about to show you another one. And there are a couple of different variations of the story. And again, the basic stem, where this story of the Caledonian boar hunt comes from, how it relates to Oeneus and Althemai, that part is unclear. Here we have a picture of a section from the famous Francois vase, around 575 BCE, and you can see here that the story is already really well established. There's the massive, terrifying boar, a dead man under his feet, a dead dog that the boar has gored in this fight, and the characters are labeled conveniently. There's Meleagros out in the front, and next to him Peleus, and behind them Atalanta and Milanion. Atalanta is a warrior maiden who's going to figure very prominently in this story. Our oldest literary version is, of course, in Homer's Iliad, Book 9. And there we learn that Aeneas failed to honor Artemis in a harvest festival. She got angry and sends this monstrous, unstoppable boar, which ravages the land and lays low anyone who dares to attempt to stand up to it. Meleagar, along with the other hunters, killed the boar, Meleagar being the son of Aeneas and Althea. And a war over the head and the skin erupts, and the Caledonians have fight with the Curetes, two different branches that live there. And Althea is, of course, a descendant of the Curetes. And, of course, there's nothing worse than a family quarrel, as this argument over who gets to keep the spoils of the hunt grows more and more vehement. Meleagar kills his mother's brother, and she curses him. So he goes home to his wife, who's named Cleopatra. I'll talk about that name in a moment. And he sulks away from the battle. The Curetes are winning, and everybody's begging him to go back to battle because he's such a great warrior. And only when his own house is attacked does he agree to go out to battle, and as Cleopatra persuades him to do. And in Homer, the moral of the story is that because Meleagar refused the entreaties and the promised rewards of his countrymen and only fought when he absolutely had to, persuaded by his wife, he didn't get the rewards. This story is told to Achilles, who is sulking in his tent, angered over the way that Agamemnon has mistreated him. And it's being told as a way of saying, accept Agamemnon's rewards and come back to battle, be a good soldier, be a loyal teammate. And Achilles says, no. Apollodorus, again a late source, it gives a variation of this in which Meleagar is killed in that battle, and both his wife and his mother hang themselves afterwards. The later version incorporates a very old fairy tale motif. We got a love affair. Meleagar is smitten by the beautiful huntress Atalanta, of whom we'll speak in a moment, and she draws the first blood, shooting an arrow at the boar, and Meleagar gives her the spoils of the hunt. Then the fight breaks out, and he kills his mother's brothers, and Althea, in rage, burns the fatal firebrand in which her son's life is contained. This is a very old folk motif, that a person's life could be bound up in some object, somewhat like what we see in Harry Potter with the Horcrux, that a person could be eventually killed if this object is destroyed. In Ovid, we get the metamorphosis, that the women who mourn for Meleagar turn themselves into guinea fowl, the Meleagrides. In Bacchylides' story, this is a 5th century BCE story, much earlier than Ovid, we learn that Heracles, in his trip to the underworld to steal the 3-headed dog from the underworld, meets Meleagar, and he promises to marry Meleagar's sister, Deianira, who will bring about Hercules' death ultimately. Now, I did promise to say a word about the name Cleopatra, in case anybody was confused. Cleopatra is a Greek name. It means the person of glorious ancestry. And that becomes important when we read about, as you will later on, not too much later since the semester's almost over, when you read about the story of Antony and Cleopatra. The Romans tried to represent Cleopatra as an Egyptian queen because it made a better storyline that the Romans under Augustus were fighting against these Egyptians, rather than acknowledging the fact that Cleopatra was of Ptolemaic lineage. The Ptolemies ruled Egypt at the time and was about as Greek and as distinguished a Hellenic family as could be found. But at any rate, I didn't want you to be confused. That's not the Cleopatra of Antony and Cleopatra fame. It's a perfectly easy to understand Greek name. The visual tradition of Meleagar and Atalanta and the boar hunt is very, very rich. This is one of my favorite wacky paintings. It's from the school of Rubens. And here we have Meleagar presenting the boar's head to the beautiful Atalanta. And you can see the little Cupid, who's clearly showing that they're in love with each other. It just has this foolishness about it. Why is Atalanta half undressed, one may ask? And she seems to have written on her face, "Oh, dear, I had really hoped you were going to bring me a handbag made by Gucci or Coach, but I'm even more thrilled with his boar's head." Well, at any rate, I just wanted you to see the irony and humor in this painting, or I should say, unwitting probably by the artist himself. And here we have a rip-roaring hunting scene by the great artist Peter Paul Rubens. And there you see the fierce boar. He's claimed a human victim lying at his hoof. And the dogs are attacking him, and Castor and Pollux on their horses are trying to stab him. But there's Meleagar right in front with his boar spear. And behind him, Atalanta, who has loosed the arrow that drew first blood on the boar. And it figured heavily in Roman art as well. There you can see the boar all the way over on your right, and Meleagar in the middle, and behind him Atalanta. And another Roman sarcophagus there again, Meleagar with his boar spear, and a little bit to your right of him is Atalanta with her bow. Okay, team, I really did overdo it here, but I do like the tradition in later art. There is Atalanta, the huntress, loosing the arrow, and the dogs attacking the boar, and Meleagar with his spear. Just really vivid stuff, and obviously captured the imagination of people for many centuries. And a close-up there of Atalanta. I really do love the dynamism in this Rubens painting, so indulge me that I've made this thing very graphic heavy. So let's finish out the story now. Poor Meleagar has died for love, one might say, and Atalanta has her own story. She was exposed as a baby, but she was suckled by a she-bear, and that made her obviously really tough. She's a bold huntress, and she actually out-wrestles Peleus, the father of Achilles, on one occasion. She begs her father to allow her to remain unwed, and he says that's fine, but you have to defeat anybody who comes as a suitor and in a foot race. And of course, they lose, they die. Now, Meleagar, also known as Hippomenes, defeats her with golden apples given to him by Aphrodite, or in another more probabilistic version of the story, he becomes her hunting partner until finally she's convinced that he's worthy of her and love triumphs. But somebody as hot-blooded as Atalanta is likely to be indiscreet, And the story is that she and Meleagar had sexual intercourse in a temple area, and the angry deity turns them into lions, who are, of course, known for their sexual appetites as well, and that's the sad end of that story. The story of Atalanta as the tough huntress out wrestling Peleus is quite old. This vase is middle of the 6th century BCE, and there you see Atalanta on your left and Peleus on your right, just squaring off. And another scene, this one from the very end of the 6th century BCE, of Atalanta on your right, wrestling Peleus. She's got a reasonably good hold on his neck, and since we know the end of the story, we know that she did defeat him. What I want you to take away from the story of Meleagar is the way that story was used in antiquity as a warning against excessive rage and revenge. Interestingly enough, already made very clear in our first literary rendition of it, which is in Homer.